I think we can all agree that the Nazis were the bad guys in World War II. Well, all of us who were Nazis anyway. The same can be said of Imperial Japan, with its genocidal campaign in China and other Asian regions. Unlike a few decades ago, Japanese crimes are fairly well known outside of Asia. The Nanjing Massacre, with its more than 200,000 murders, human experiments, sexual slavery, etc. However, that doesn't mean we consider the US nuclear attack on Hiroshima or the second attack on Nagasaki to be just. Both attacks have endured in the collective memory as war crimes. Even those who argue that only the use of weapons led to the surrender of the Asian nation acknowledge that it was a massacre, a necessary horror at best. Nevertheless, the situation changes radically when we talk about the other great genocidal empire, Nazi Germany, and the bombing of Dresden in February 1945, which left at least 22,000 dead. It could be interesting to compare it with the bombing of Tokyo in March of that same year, which killed more than 100,000 people, a dark precedent for what was to come in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is well known that Dresden has been a controversial and manipulated issue since the mid-20th century by figures such as Holocaust denier David Irving and his fake death toll, used by novelist Kurt Vonnegut in his novel Slaughterhouse Five or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance with Death. The fact that the bombing of Dresden has been repeatedly exploited by the German international far-right for years has led to the massacre being constantly downplayed by sectors of the left. First, we have the delusional Anti-Deutsche Antifa group, with its banners thanking Royal Air Force Commander Harris for bombing Germany, something sinister considering that the Anti-Deutsch are fervent defenders of Israel. And one of the individuals we are going to criticize, YouTuber Bad Empanada, has used Harris's name on several of his Twitter accounts in a sarcastic anti-Zionist tone. To begin with, we'll talk about Crowd, a liberal YouTuber, an archenemy of Bad Empanada. In 2018, he uploaded a video justifying the Allied bombing of Germany, a topic we won't discuss here. I'm simply interested in the fact that, in his demented anti-communism, the Austrian YouTuber suggests that the beginning of the myth of Dresden as a martyr city was started by the communists of the German Democratic Republic simply because they built memorials. Kraut, like some leftists, believes that the civilian victims of this bombing deserve no recognition. In this case, we must ask ourselves whether those of Hiroshima and Nagasaki should not receive such recognition either. In 2025, Norwegian YouTuber Freda dedicated a video in response to Nazi YouTuber Sumer Historian about Dresden. Like Krot, Freda downplays what happened in Dresden, claiming that the Nazis were the ones who started the war, telling us that the first building to burn in Dresden was a synagogue, but in 1938. The bulk of the video consists of technical details about the attack. It's noteworthy that he emphasizes that ground-level strafing by Mustang fighters wasn't carried out in Dresden, but was carried out nearby. This was a fairly common technique, including against civilians in both Europe and Japan. Similarly, the bombing is justified under the pretext that Germany carried out the first air raid of the war. Should we then justify the 1945 bombing of Tokyo? After all, the first bombings of the war in Asia were carried out by Japan. The provisional Chinese capital, Chongqing, was subjected to brutal bombing for 6 years, and other cities, such as Ningpo, were attacked with biological weapons. However, when talking about the bombings of Tokyo or Hiroshima, I have never heard anyone downplay them with the idea that the first to bomb civilian infrastructure in the world were the Japanese. Nevertheless, within the English-speaking left, the Dresden issue is constantly downplayed. Dresden was a Nazi city. The Nazis started the war and bombed cities and capitals throughout Europe. Therefore, Dresden was a just revenge. Now let's turn the argument around. Tokyo was a city of the genocidal Japanese Empire. The Japanese imperialists started the war and bombed cities throughout Asia. Therefore, Tokyo was a just revenge. English-speaking leftists barely ever use this argument. Bad Empanada used the name Bomber Harris. He would never use Paul Tibbets or Curtis LeMay. There are obvious double standards on this issue between the bombing of Europe and the bombing of Asia. From the right, Attempts have been made to argue that this is because the bombing of Japan was the work of the Americans, and that is why the left detests them. According to the right, leftists are capable of forgiving Japanese atrocities in order to morally attack the American imperialists. This argument makes no sense. First of all, the perpetrators of the bombing of Germany were also the Americans and their allies. Furthermore, left wing Twitter doesn't relativize Japanese crimes, nor does it relativize German crimes. It doesn't relativize the bombings of Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. In these cases, left wing Twitter users agree that they were war crimes. In Dresden, they don't. The answer is simple: white guilt and third worldism. In the eyes of the American left, a clear parallel is drawn with the massacres in Korea and Vietnam. A Yankee leftist makes jokes about killing Nazis. A Yankee leftist never makes jokes about killing Japanese. For the anti imperialist left, there is a clear succession: Japan, Korea, Vietnam. A white man's war against Asians, a very American vision, a people obsessed with race, in a corruption of the basic principles of Marxism. It is not capital that oppresses, but white power. In a schizophrenic twist, this decolonial language has been adopted by defenders of Chinese capital. Oppression doesn't matter if it's not carried out by white men. In their idiocy, the Nazis will claim that the bombing of Dresden was a white genocide. It wasn't. The bombing of Japan wasn't an Asian genocide either. Even though American propaganda portrayed the Japanese with the most crude racism, the Chinese were heroes, normal, virile Asians, just like the Filipinos. The vision of white guilt pervades the American left and prevents a serious analysis of history. Dresden was a crime that should not be relativized. If we were to relativize Dresden, should we then also relativize Tokyo, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima?